You know, I try to talk about it and I just go, well, you know, I can look at a thread, like, it all started back when, you know, so maybe we just start it and talk, see what happens.
Yeah. We're on.
Oh, we're on?
Yep.
Okay.
So what is it that makes it a virtuosity within you? What are you talking about there? What virtuosity?
Being conscious at the level of the cultural mind, and having a strong consciousness around the movement of the shadow, or what isn't conscious, and that's strange to say, but it has always been like that for me. And you know, since that time of like, I had a death as a 3-year-old, and they tell me I was so different after that. I was very dreamy and all of that. And
I can see that.
yeah, yeah. And one of the things that I used to freak my mother out quite a lot. One of the things that went on was that I would go into my parents to see what was going on underneath, rather than just what they were presenting, to see how I could behave. And you know, being a kid, and you manipulate that. Sometimes I can use what they're presenting, I can use the other, or you know.
What do you mean going into your parents?
It's this movement of where I can explain it in more adult terms now than of course, and it started at a fairly pre-verbal age anyway. But it's this thing where when our auras touch each other, my auric sensing capacity senses things that are in you. So, and everybody does it. You know, kids do it. Everybody. And I had a capacity to isolate that, or to discriminate that.
Okay.
Also at the group of the cultural mind, or the group mind. In fact, it was so strong in me, life was really very confusing until I was 38, and I could not differentiate very well the feelings of others, or the movement of, you know, the feelings of group mind that get generated. Now I couldn't discriminate them from myself.
How do you discriminate between what's yours in your aura versus what's someone else's?
It's a bit tricky because, well, in the first place, what I generate in here, so I need to be connected with my motivation, what I do to actually generate emotion. That's one thing. Emotions that come that aren't generated by me aren't mine. And that was one discrimination. There's also that movement of what happens in the group. So,
so clarifying question there. If I've got something I'm doing that I'm unconscious about, i.e. it's in my shadow, then I won't know that I'm initiating it. All I'll see would be, you know, say the emotion or the thought afterwards. How can you discern what you have initiated versus what's been initiated from outside?
Well, there's this principle that says, you know, we can see the mote in another's eye more easily than we can see the beam in our own. Now, and that's very true when it comes to the shadow. And that's one part of the study. And the other part is what you can feel in another person and what they present. And what the feelings you get when you're in someone else is actually to do with their whole worldview or way of understanding and those kinds of things. So it doesn't mean that I can immediately know what's for them. What I can do is just feel those. But I can only translate that, or I can only understand that according to my worldview or my way of understanding things. So what comes up to me in a verbal form about what's going on with someone else is not necessarily what's going on, but the feeling that I get is the feeling.
Okay.
And so then it takes, the two people have to get together and talk, and if the one that's feeling what's in the other, and you find where something resonates, and the person, having gotten something like this, the other person can go in a bit deeper and find. In fact, one of the things that I learned during running the workshops, the strong workshops, was this capacity to go in and find some feeling of someone's, identify it, and consciously identify with that in myself.
Okay.
Act it out whoever came in my body.
Okay.
And 9 times out of 10, it's usually in the men's work, but men and women, the other person gets the resonance of that.
Okay.
And then they can find what's hidden. Suddenly it comes in their body and they can express. And that's a particular skill.
Okay. Yep.
It's not something that you do outside a workshop space particularly. But this thing I always had it, and I used to get a lot of strange looks when I was a kid.
Okay.
And there's one example where I was having something at school. Those things at school where suddenly you're unpopular, and everyone's hands against you and so on. And my mum was holding me and I was crying, I was sad about all that. And I said to her, why don't they just come into me and see who I am? And she was pretty Christian and so on, and she freaked. She was freaked. And she held me tight and closed her eyes and had the impression she was praying to God to make me all right. and that's how I thought it was kind of done. I thought the people came into you. And it's partially true. Like people, kids do it all the time.
Yeah. I can identify that in myself, but I don't have that history with it or that familiarity with it. I haven't had it my whole life in the way you have. So I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And when I was in my mid-30s, my mum told me that she was always afraid of my mind, even when I was a little boy. And Dad used to. I used to get this thing like I would say a truth as I perceive it, so I would get in trouble from teachers. And I would say, Dad, but it's true. And he gave me this poem called "If" by Rudyard Kipling. And the part that I always remembered was, he said, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, if you can see the things you gave your life to, broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools, if you can live the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, then yours is the world and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
Wow.
And that held me in good stead, this is my dad's and my dad's advice, this is his mentoring of me. And one curious thing around that is that when I turned to a young man, I got involved in politics and Labour Party politics and student politics. I got very involved in the whole shadow myself, really, like doing the whole, taking words out of context and using them back against people and gathering the numbers and, trying to, they're the like Liberals are the enemy, or the other faction, the Labour Party is the enemy, and gathering people and convincing people with charisma and half-truths and so on to come on side, to get the numbers, to force through something at a meeting and all of that. And I was involved with it for some years, and I had this whole, that seemed to me, because in our cultural mind, that's how it's done. That's how it's done. That's how you sell things. That's how you do politics. It's how you do religion. It's the whole cultural mind is around the means justifying the end, and so
power in business.
Power in business. And one time I remember something triggered me. I don't know. And I remembered this poem again. If you can bear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools. And I was really shocked to realise that I was one of the knaves. That I had been twisting other people's truths and all of that. And things started to get much more clear after that, in terms of I had to create principles to live by. For myself, not ones I've been given by culture or even my dad or whoever. Create my own principles to live by. And so eventually, when I was 38, I started to discriminate what was going on. And before this, it was so strange living in all of that, like in the cultural mind and all this. You know, I became a really full-on alcoholic. I took a lot of drugs, a lot of drugs. And one time in my late 20s, I just went stuff. I went to the beach. I just couldn't handle society, couldn't handle anything. I went to the beach just to stay there. You know, I just need to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And within 2 weeks, most of that stuff stopped. Suddenly I just get really clear and simple, and even I didn't have any desire to drink or even to smoke cigarettes, and you know, it just. And I was on the beach for a while, and I thought, oh, I'm right, I'm back. And then I go back into the society, live in society, and it would only take a couple of weeks before I was back into it, drinking, and I bounced back and forth for a while, and then eventually I spent a lot of time just living. Over 3 years, I spent a lot of time living in beaches in a tent and travelling, and that eventually, from things that I discovered in there, that led me into Aikido. Like I needed a discipline. I decided I was 34 or something to give up. So I'm going to give up booze and take up Aikido. You know, take up principles of living and so. And it wasn't really until I was 38 that I got to this place where I started to discriminate. Oh yeah. And 3 years later, I went and lived on this breathwork community. And I did a lot of spiritual work. I lived there and trained. And
so 38, 15 years ago.
38,
50?
18 years ago. I'm 56.
Okay.
Yeah, that was 18 years ago. And so I went and lived there, and I started to realise that this thing that had been the bane of my life, I had no idea, like I had trouble with identity, everything. And I discovered this was actually a gift. This was a gift because in the workshops or in, you know, I could just find these things, and it was finding the skills of how to feed that back to a person or whatever.
Okay.
And
so we're about halfway through our planned 20-minute thing, and I'm wondering, is now a time to bring in how this relates to your experience of the joining and your vision of the joining and what's going on in your world around that?
Yes, there's also you know, my immersion in the shamanic field, which went for quite some years, and I'm just coming out and moving on from that. And you know, I was given a shamanic name out in the desert with, you know, in sacred ritual on sacred land.
Okay.
And my name is very much to do with all of this. And I originally was going to say it on tape, but actually I'm not going to do that now.
Okay.
But the part of that is about working, to be able, the ability to work in the shadows and to be able to stand in the two worlds. And one thing that I clearly got is that the point is to make the shadow conscious.
Right.
Like the shadow is not something evil, it's not darkness that needs to be pushed away, it's not any of that. It's ignorance. It's those things of which we are ignorant. And anything we call evil is simply ignorance compounded on ignorance compounded on ignorance. And most of what happens in most religions, in the New Age, and you know, most of what happens with people, they want to go to the light and have light experiences and come more and so on. And that's a part of it. And the other part is taking the light of your consciousness into the places of ignorance, into the shadow, into the darker areas. And that's the place where I've been working for a really long time. A lot of people just work in, you know, bring the light, go to the light and so on. And yet there's our whole cultural movement is around avoiding and pushing away dark.
Right.
There's many religions and so on, they talk about it's all evil, it's bad, you know, there's a saint and then there's entities and there's all these horrible ghosts and, you know, all horriblenesses. And I've spent a lot of time, I've spent 53 years in that chiaroscuro of light and shadow.
Okay.
And I can see how easy it is for people to go one way or another. Really, people be corrupted by power and so on.
Chiaroscuro?
Chiaroscuro, it means of light and shadow.
Okay.
Of light and shadow. And when the joining first began, the whole visioning around the joining as being, you know, the whole masculine and feminine to come together and to find out how is this. And there's a big pressure to treat the shadow as something that eventually we will escape. Eventually, if we keep doing this, it'll just left behind because we'll be too conscious. But it's that whole movement of what goes on in the shadow that keeps us from doing that. And, you know, when you take a candle, it doesn't matter how dark something is, it stops being dark. One candle, that's it. And so we've got a lot of social conventions, particularly in spiritual practices and particularly in the New Age, where people want to treat that as something that you transcend.
Right.
Whereas the issues that are in us, you know, what's underneath, is what motivates so much. You know, the fear of that goes, I only want this, I don't want that. This is good, this is bad. You know? And it's the capacity to go into this with a mature mind, a conscious mind. Like if we're going into a wound of childhood, there's no point going back into it and wallowing around in the childishness of it. You can go into it, feel it fully, totally, but you take the movement of the adult mind into that place.
Okay. So sometimes things are good and sometimes they're bad. I mean, I know, you know, for myself, I'm sometimes moved to want to respond to what feels bad. I mean, what do you say to that?
What do you mean?
How do I engage with that which appears dysfunctional in a healthy adult way? What's the... there's a thing, you know, a lot of people live in an issues consciousness. I've got an issue and so, you know, I've got an issue so I have to fix it or make myself feel better or something. But, you know, when you become conscious in that place with your mature consciousness, it's not something to be made better, it's not something to be fixed, it's not something to, you know, transcend. It's just what it is. And you can feel the whole movement of the soul at work. You know, when you're young, your soul does things like you go, no, I'm blocking this out, no. And that's just what the soul does. Because it's coming through a structure of consciousness that's only 6 years old. And so when you go back into that, you go right into it and you see this absolute genius soul, you know, in a 6-year-old body, you just go, instead of going, oh, this is so terrible, you go with adult consciousness, you go, what an amazing thing for a 6-year-old. You know, this is so extraordinary. And it's that light, so the light goes in there, not, oh, this is wrong and I have to forgive. And, you know, you might have to go through that process. But eventually, if you go right deeply into it, you take your light into the whole thing. You know, you can feel the 6-year-old, the aura of the other person wronging you. Your aura is in there, isn't it? And you can go in and you can find what they were feeling, where they were. You can go right into that place and illuminate the whole thing. And it's like that with groups too. In groups, in the study of groups, psychologists, group psychology, we talk about the work group, which is the group comes together for a task. And they talk about the basic assumptions group, which is the group underneath. That's all the hidden motivations and people's issues and all those kind of things that affect that. Now, I call that the shadow group. So in the joining, from the very beginning, it has been this movement of that shadow group. Our inner work is the most important thing. The doing and the task on it has to arise out of how we do that. Because this is the heart of the joining. What we are prepared to do at the cultural and group level affects how the joining is, like the very centre of that. And so, and when I was on the committee, I would always looking out for the shadow and so I'll address it in the moment, in the person, you know, bang, bang, again. And this creates quite a lot of angst. And it's hard to tell people that don't know about this who want to come on the committee, you know, we tell them, look, this is really full on, you know, it's a total 1-year workshop, you know, and that the feeling and the being needs to be primary and the doing arising, all these words. And, but always it comes to that, and for me, though, I've got certain ways and principles where I will stay in
where I am. And I speak with an authority that comes from 53 years of study. An authority that comes from a place, and it's not a matter of saying, oh, I know what's happening in you and you don't, and it's not a matter of that. It's like, so you have to be totally involved in this, you know. It's like, you can't sit back like a therapist, therapizing. To go soul to soul, you need to be right in there. So if my frustration comes, I need to be in that, you know, like they are in, and so it needs to be soul to soul. It's not that sitting back and therapizing. Because the beam in my eyes is going to be obvious to other people too. You know? So it's mutual. Like causality in this is a mutual thing. It's not causality is not linear. It's mutual. It's reciprocal.
Okay.
And when you get that in a group, when you start happening in a group, there'll be this and this and this and this. And so the group mind will come to a focus on its own. It will always come to a focus on its own. And if you've got someone in there who's conscious enough, then there's room to work with that. And it all doesn't have to resolve. It doesn't have to resolve. The willingness of the centre is what informs the joining. The willingness to go there, that's what it is. And I become the focus of that. Anyone in that position becomes the focus. In a similar way, like every therapist knows about transference and counter-transference, and with individuals, but also with groups. And a lot of like Jungian therapists and Gestalt therapists also, part of my job is to be projected upon, and then I go and get clean by going to my supervisor, and I unload, and I, you know. But in this is a bigger place. This is a much bigger place than that. And so I've been getting this. I've been a target of group shadow all my life. When I was a kid, it happened, you know? And I've grown through all that and found my place in that. And I've only really become, really only been able to articulate all of this together since working with you mainly, but other people around, getting this whole, the whole movement of spiritual evolution, which is starting to become conscious. Like Kenmore was one place, but there's other places, and we can see how this relates to how yogis talked about it, and so they use different language, and this is a more Western language. And so I started to get that sense of the wholeness of that, and I haven't been able to articulate it before. And instead of it being, Rudran must be the cause, because everyone's pointing, I see it as that I have a virtuosity in this place. I have a really high skill. And this doesn't make me a better person, or this doesn't make me more wise, or it's as much a skill and a virtuosity as yours is in that movement of that overarching sense of cultural and personal revolution, how it all fits with physical, that expansion of intellectual mind and so on. That's a virtuosity, and that I've been, it's the same with other elders, like Rose, she is moving into this place of universal self-service. That is immense.
Selfless service?
Selfless service. Did I say self-service? I was thinking of pulling and getting some petrol from from BP.
She's going to run McDonald's in the sky.
She's going to run McDonald's. Yeah. McRose's.
McRose's, there you go.
Yeah, no, universal self-service is a big place. And it's a high, she's my mentor in that place. I'm constantly stunned. And Peter Kroll in music, the virtuosity he has in music, and how he goes into that place of spirit to find, there's lots how Falu and Michael move with love and consciousness, and they balance this thing in group relating. What they do with the couple mind, like group mind, couple mind is similar, but there's two. Lots of people get into this couple thing, and they treat each other certain ways, and they don't address their shadows, and so they get this notion of who they are as a couple, and they get stuck, and there's this really sticky thing of they can't behave this way and that way because they get stuck in their couple thing, which is a group mind of two. And Falu and Michael keep theirs really clear. And there's an incredible virtuosity for that. And there's so many things, like Navani has it in the feeling field. And where Navani and I support each other in that, she gets so much in the feeling field that I'm in her aura, she's in it, and I get it. I can feel it because I'm in it. And whereas I've got this really strong element of discrimination, so I can show her how to discriminate more. And she's in things. How can I learn more discrimination? You know, so these are just virtuosities, and I just consider. And I heard this phrase, the shadow seat, about some Mankind Project and guys.
Okay.
And I realise that's, you know, that there's someone in that shadow seat, which has been me. And I also see, you know, one thing I was told when I was doing an advanced shamanic training 10 years ago was an example of how the elders treated the group shadow. And so they would, and the example I was given was, you know, they could take the men to red kangaroo dreaming, which is a warrior dreaming, women to corkwood tree dreaming, and they would do the inner work. And a lot of the inner work happens just like therapy with it, you know, it's just like you have guys having sessions and, you know, what we would call that. And the women do their work and they come back and they weave together, you know, with corroboree, you know, with dance and song and masculine, feminine, and then after all this time, all of this might take weeks. And tribal harmony. And what I want to see is that the elders of the joining to take responsibility for the movement of the shadow, for the movement of the group shadow. So we need to find ways of doing that. Yeah.
That seems like a beautiful point at which to end that and begin.
No, so we made sure that the sound's on and everything. Do we know if it's worked? We kept it fairly on focus, didn't we?
I think so.